Do you remember the time when Chitty Chitty Bang Bang came on the telly? It was the first indication that Christmas was on its way. Mind you, back then we only had 3 channels and the kids were the remote control. But what about the cars from that film? What happened to them? Well, if you want to find out, keep watching. So what actually was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? Well, the cars were built bespoke for the film by a company called Allen Man Racing. And they would be known to a lot of people because they built the race cars for Ford Motor Company and more recently are building a continuation Mark I Ford Escorts. And Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was quite a monster. It had a 3-litre V6 engine from the Ford Zephyr, had an automatic gearbox on the back. Well, Dick Van Dyke was American, so clutch pedal would be a bit alien to him. And was a monster of a car, 17 plus feet long. As you can see in this promotional picture from the time with Australian racing driver Frank Gardner, next to the Mark I Escort, you can see just how big it was. Now, as is common with a lot of these film cars, there was more than one. If you remember our video about the Lotus Esprit from the Spy Who Loved Me Bond films, there were 6 or 7 of those. And of course there is a link back to Bond films from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang because the same novelist, Ian Flemming, wrote both stories. Now, let's crack on. Let's look at the first car. The first car we're going to look at is actually one with one of the most straightforward histories. GEN 11 was the famous registration of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and this car was the one with that registration plate. Now, after it finished its promotional work after the film was launched in 1968, it was purchased by a chap called Pierre Picton, and he really enjoyed that car. He used it across Europe and I believe beyond. And he would take it out. I've heard from people who say he would take it out just to a local supermarket opening, and he really just took it around, just wanted to enjoy it himself and to show it off to people, which I think is really great. He was approached apparently by a certain Michael Jackson who wanted it for his Neverland Ranch, and he felt that it should be out in public view and be used, not hidden away in Michael Jackson's backyard, so he turned down his approach. Come 2011, at 76 years old, Pierre decided it was time to sell it on, so it went for auction over in California, where it sold for $805,000, which at the time equated to £495,000, which was a little short of the estimate. They thought it would do somewhere closer to $1 million. So who bought it? A chap called Sir Peter Jackson, who many of you will know as the producer and director of the Hobbit trilogy. And he exported it to his home in New Zealand. And unfortunately couldn't register it as GEN 11 down there because that plate was already taken. But as we can see by Car Jam, he's actually got it on GEN 1I. And he is still using the car. There's some footage of him actually taking it to work when they were filming The Hobbit and just having it parked there in the car park. So he's out there enjoying it. But this is not the end of Chitty Chitty Bang Bangs registered as GEN 11, and you'll find out more about that later in the video. Moving on from the main car, we're now into cars that were built for sort of specific bits of the film. And the next one we're going to look at is actually the driverless car that went into the castle and carried out the rescue. Now, how this was facilitated is this car was obviously fully drivable, but it had a steering wheel on the floor, so there was somebody sort of hidden down there that was actually able to make the car go along. And this car, after the filming, disappeared for quite some time, but reappeared in 2000 in the Cars of the Stars Museum up in Keswick in Cumbria. I mistakenly said Lancashire last time, and the Cumbrian natives got a bit angry with me.
It's a fair cop.
But Peter Nelson purchased this one, and he had it in his museum for 11 years until 2011, when he sold the whole museum over to America to a chap called Michael Deezer, or Dezer. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it. And what he did is he opened a museum in Miami, but that wasn't really close enough to the sort of big tourist area in Orlando. So eventually moved it over to Orlando in his Deezerland Park, where the Bond car that we mentioned earlier, one of those is there as well. And then in 2022, Deezerland decided to loan that car out, and it's now at the Stahls Auto Foundation over in Michigan. The next car looked exactly the same as the previous two, however it was missing something quite critical, an engine and a gearbox. And this was because it was a car used for close-ups. They would put it on a trailer behind a film car, and Dick Van Dyke would be doing all this business at the steering wheel, and it didn't need to be powered. This car, following filming, was purchased again by Pierre Picton, and he put in an engine and gearbox to make it drivable, and was using it apparently in a bit of a circus act in the early 1970s. He didn't keep it that long though, because he then sold it on to Heathfield Wildlife Park, who had a bit of a car exhibition going on there down in East Sussex in the south of England. But again, they didn't keep it for too long, because they sold it on to a place called Rotunda Theme Park in Folkestone in Kent, right down in the bottom corner of England. And they had it there for a while, but in the early 80s decided to sell it on, and they sold it to Sir Anthony Bamford, him of JCB fame. Now, Sir Anthony had this registered, and with GEN 11 gone, he got GEM 11, so pretty close on that one. And we can see it was on the road. It had MOT in 2012, 2017, and especially 2019. Now, the reason for that, hold tight, there's a bit of an explanation coming, particularly for people not in the UK. In September 19, the GEN 11 registration number came up for sale. Yes, the one that was on the original car. So before it was exported to New Zealand, or possibly even before it went to California, that number plate was removed, and just an age-related plate of some form was put on it. And apparently that plate was seen on a Honda Jazz of all things. And after a few years, basically, remember the first car was sold in 2011. 2017, this came up for sale at the, 2019, it came up for sale at the Festival of Speed and sold for a quite eye-watering £57,500. Does include fees, so it's not too expensive. And as you can see by the plate change, Sir Anthony had this put on his Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So there is now a Chitty Chitty Bang Bang with Gen 11 in the UK, but it's not the original Gen 11, if that makes sense. This car occasionally gets loaned to Bewley as it's a running drivable version, and it's not the one that you see inside, the one with the wings out on the stand. That's a separate car. We'll come to that one in a minute. And the car does get used for other things as well. I've seen it being used for a wedding, for example, for the daughter of the director Ken Hughes in London. So it is getting used and put out and about. I'm just going to interrupt my own video because there's a couple of, well, I would argue, very high quality replicas out there that sometimes people get a little bit blurred, mainly by very poor media reporting, that are actually original cars from the film as against replicas. The first one is car registration number GEN22, and this is a car built by a chap called Tony Green in the early 2000s. And he actually got this one licensed by MGM as an official replica car. He kept it until 2007 when he sold it for £250,000. I then see it reappear again in 2010 in this video by Manchester Evening News, where this car and also the Pink Panther car were coming up for auction apparently in Manchester. Doesn't appear it was sold then, because it came up for auction again in 2011 with a company called Robson K, and apparently the person who bought it from Tony Green had spent about $48,000 on it in sort of improving some of the electronics and trickery it was doing, and they had it up for an estimate of $150,000 to $250,000. Now, I don't know what it sold for, but if we look at my car check, we have got the appropriate change of keepers in 2007 and 2011, so it still seems it's in the same hands. As far as I can ascertain, it was purchased by a chap called Gregor G, who initially was trying to rent it out as chitty car for weddings and PR events and so on, and that website seemed to be active till about 2016. The car then, it appears to have been given or loaned or something to Bowness Motor Museum, and they then lent it again to Dundee Museum of Transport, where it was until February 2025, when Bowness Motor Museum announced it was returning for display with them, and that is where it is today. So the Chris Evans car, which I know is going to come up in the comments, so I'm going to go for it now. I'm going to have to refer to notes because this is a complete nightmare. Right, this car, I believe, is the one that was built by a guy called Gordon Grant, or at least he commissioned it. Now, the history of this car is that it was built from the chassis of car number 3. Now, if you remember the very beginning of the film, Chitty is not Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Chitty was just a Paragon Panther, I think it was. And at the end of the opening scene, it crashes into a ball of flames. Now, from what I've read and articles relating to this car, this car was built from that chassis. And that car came to auction in November 2011. It didn't sell at auction. It was estimated by Bonhams at £240,000 to £270,000. It was also showing registration number WGG5. I can't find any relation to this car. Now, this was a very good replica, to be fair. Now, Chris Evans purchased his car in 2012. Now, I think it's this same car. At the time, it was badly misreported that Chris Evans had actually bought the number 1 car from that Pierre Picton had sold in California. That was a complete rubbish story. Now, Chris got this car registered as 772YUJ. Now, that's as a 1932 Ford, if we look on my car check of what the history is of this car. It has got a Ford V6 engine, but it's got a later clone engine in before everyone jumps in and tells me about that. Now, Chris went on to put this up for auction in 2015 at Bonhams again, Goodwood Festival of Speed, I think. Estimate 250 to 350, and didn't sell. And in August 2016, he still owns it because there's an article showing that he's got it at Carfest and mentions that he wasn't able to sell it at auction the previous year. And this is where Gordon Grant re-enters the story. In September 2016, so a month after we know Chris Evans still had the car, he announces he's loaning a Chitty Chitty Bang Bang car to the Riverside Museum in Glasgow. Now, when you read the description, talks about dilapidated stunt car and so on, it reads very much like the description from Bonhams of how it was built over a long time with original people and so on. And there can't be that many cars, apart from the Tony Green one, that fit that description. So I believe that car has gone back to Gordon Grant. Where it exactly is now, not 100% sure, but that one, is it a replica, is it an original? I'll let you decide in the comments. The fourth one I want to look at is one really cool sort of flying Chitty. It's one where the wings came out and the propellers went round, etc. Now, I can find a fairly early report of this car being sold at auction back in 1973 for the grand sum of $37,000. But in today's money, that's around about $250,000. And this car appeared a couple of years later in 1975 in the cavalcade of cars at the Gaslight Village Amusement Park in New York State. And it was there for a few years. The park itself closed in 1989 and the car went to auction. And it was purchased by a car called Jim Rich. Quite an appropriate name, someone who's got a lot of money to spend on a car. And he displayed it at his Chicago West restaurant known as Mona Lisa's Hideaway. Now, he had it there for a number of years until, unfortunately, Jim became less rich and he was declared bankrupt and everything had to go to auction. And in May 2007, the car went to auction, and despite being estimated at in excess of $1 million, it only made it to $505,000. Don't feel too sorry for Jim. In another of his car purchases, he purchased a 1975 Ford Escort 1100 GL. You think, well, yeah, okay, what's special about that? Well, apparently this one was owned once by Pope John Paul II, and Jim in 1996 had paid just $102,000 for this car, and he went on to sell it in 2005 for $690,000. Apparently it came with papal beads, so that obviously added to the value. But back to Chitty. So who paid $505,000 for it? Well, it was a guy called Ralph Tyler Spencer, who was a businessman. He got a large business producing mulch for putting on the ground and keeping your weeds down and so on. And he paid another £575,000 on top of that to restore the car, get it fully working, driving, getting all the wings come out and so on. And in 2018, he displayed it on a sort of area of his own mulch to celebrate 50 years of the film and showed the wings coming out and the props and so on. And as far as I'm aware, he has still got it. Occasionally brings it out apparently for sort of charity events and so on. The fifth one I'm going to talk about is the Transformer car. And this is the one, if you remember, when Chitty gets caught by the tide and starts to convert into a boat. Now this car was another one of the engineless ones, and it had slightly different constructions, like the radiator grille was aluminium, and the reason for that, they believe, is that the brass would have got discoloured by the salt water. This car, post-filming, was sent down under to Australia and New Zealand on a sort of promotional tour, and was there, doing this apparently up until about 1974. It then disappeared for quite some time, but reappeared in 1983, and this is where the story gets a bit unusual. It was actually purchased by a company called Luxaflex, who are an awning company, and as far as I can work out, they are still going. But they purchased it as a promotional vehicle, and I couldn't find anything to back this up until I found this fantastic picture from 1979 posted on Facebook by Bob Williamson, and it's on Old Racing Photographs Australia, and it's at Bathurst on the grid. Obviously it wasn't racing, it was only for promotional purchases, but if you look up close at the bonnet, there it is, Luxaflex. And apparently at this point it had been fitted with a Holden engine. I don't know what specs, someone else out there might be able to inform me a bit more, but that had made the car a running and driving one. Then in 1991 it appeared at the Cars of the Star Museum in Cumbria, and they had it there basically until they purchased the second car that we talked about, which was the one that Peter Nelson bought later on. Presumably he felt that was a better one than this car, and he then sold that car on to Eon Productions. And again, we're back in the Bond theme here again, because Eon are the company that produced the Bond films, and they went on to use this car to promote the stage musical version of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which was sort of kicked off in the early 2000s. This car did attract a bit of infamy in 2009 when the police stepped in to prevent it being used in the Norwich cavalcade, and they said, sorry, it's not a fully road legal vehicle, you can't sort of drive it through, you got to put it on a trailer or something like that. And that created probably more news and media coverage than if they just let the car actually drive through. But where is this car now? Yeah, it's the one that's at Bewley, and that's actually confirmed by what they say on their website, that is that particular car from the film. And finally, the sixth car of the originals that were used in the filming. Well, it's not really a car. Well, it is, but it isn't. It's a body shell. It's for the scenes where you see Chitty bouncing along in the waves. Basically, this was a body shell strapped onto a speedboat. I've heard different reports of how this was controlled. One is that there was somebody sort of behind the radiator grille actually sort of steering it along. And one of the reports from somebody, one of the actors in the film, said it was actually controlled by the helicopter following it along. Which one is true? Not sure. But there are many reports that this was scrapped after filming. It wasn't really a car, it was just a body shell on a speedboat. So I found one person claiming it had survived, but then a lot of people claimed that Lotus Carlton 40RA had survived and it hadn't. So that's one of those typical things. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that trip, possibly a little bit down memory lane. Tell me your memories of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, particularly if you saw it out and about. With Pierre Picton seemed to sort of get his car out everywhere. Thank you as ever for watching, and I'll catch you next time.